I want to start off by just saying, it's really interesting how Dana, Nick, and myself have such similar experiences with expansion. And I think this is always going to be the underlying theme of expansion is, first of all, when you're talking globally, you're selling the market itself, right? For a lot of these, I think Nick point landed on it very, very truthfully, which is, oh, maybe next year seems to be the general response that we often get when speaking internationally, right? So I think this is fundamentally the wrong approach. I think anyone that's listening in to this conversation is realizing that there are ways to get into markets and that the markets can be very lucrative based basically just on lack of competition, being first mover advantage, like all these things, right? For Latin America specifically, I want to go a little bit first into the history, right? Where for the longest time, and I think we'll all agree here, for the longest time, Latin America was seen as an unviable market. From everything from, look, I don't know how to do it, to purchasing power, to there's a whole host of reasons why many sellers aren't looking or weren't looking at Latin America for the past 10 odd years, right, of e-commerce. For me personally, I'm Mexican, born and raised. I live abroad, most of my life, and I come back in 2017, and I realized that there's the online shopping behavior quite isn't there, right? I still got to witness in 2017 distrust for the e-commerce systems, right? So everything from, is it a scam, to does it actually get to your house, to how do you make the payment? And this is purely because culturally we hadn't been focused on, right? Like Jeff Bezos hadn't turned his sights down to Mexico and Latin America, and it wasn't the big focus. So what we ended up with is a secondary market called Mercado Libre, which I don't want to call it a secondary market. It is a stronger market in Latin America than Amazon, but it is very homegrown, right? These the three founders of Mercado Libre look at Latin America and go, hey, there's a huge opportunity here. We're going to do per country markets, right? And start that way. So they've been around for quite a while now, and to this day still hold more percentage of the market than Amazon does. And now Amazon is looking down at Mexico or looking down at Latin America and going, all right, now we're going to make the push. So what we're seeing is this huge focus of expanding e-commerce. And as a consequence of that, what we end up with is a growing consumer base, but not because there's suddenly more people, but because these people are being digitized in their shopping behaviors, which makes it incredibly lucrative because it's that much easier. It's always easier to get the piece of the pie when the pie is growing, right? Like the worst thing, the last thing you want to do is to be fighting over a pie that's shrinking, right? And then you add to this sort of a bolstering of Latin American economies where you're seeing, you're seeing Latin American currencies all rally against the dollar and get really strong. And you're seeing more national investment kind of across the board, right? And bolstering middle classes and things like remote work, sending dollars into these countries, right? And things like nearshoring after pandemic, really putting a focus light in Latin America, on Latin America, about this is the place to be, right? So what we're seeing now, after essentially a decade of being sort of a minor market, we're starting to see this growing hunger by brands to be like, I need to be in Latin America. And it makes complete sense because what we're seeing is the Latin American consumer is often paying way more for the same product because you have resellers, drop shippers, any kind of, middleman that's making just a bad shopping experience for consumers. And brands that are expanding natively to Latin American e-commerce are suddenly seeing that much more of that much less of competition. We're talking about of 20% of the PPC that you would normally spend in the US, right? And this, I'm sure, is very similar to the experiences in Japan, to the experiences in Europe, right? Where what you're seeing is, hey, this is actually a really viable project for us to carry out. And then you run into the brick walls, uh, which is where things get complicated. And everyone on this call has in the same sort of overarching issues, which is, hey, you need an IOR. You need to make sure you have a good logistics partnership. You need to make the difference for Latin America, and in my personal experience, more strongly in Mexico, is different cultures of bureaucracy, different cultures of setup, and less systems set up for international sellers to be comfortably selling within the territory, right? So what we're seeing is, hey, you can just send to FBA, and then you click send to FBA, and the very next step goes, cool, what's your tax ID? Your Mexican tax ID. And you go, I don't have one. It's like, no, of course you don't, because this isn't set up in such a way to make it easy for you, right? We've spoken to people that are like, hey, I was selling in Mexico. I just faked it and said I had a Mexican tax ID and a Mexican address. I just got hit with a yearly tax bill. What do I do? And it's like, well, you go back in time and you undo that bad choice, right? So by and large, Mexico and Latin America have become these very lucrative markets where you absolutely want to be in, especially as a smaller to medium brand where you don't have the budget to, go into the US market and drop, $500,000 on ads to get to the front page or whatever. These are very viable. This is a very viable alternative. All right. What are you going to need though? You're going to need, if you want to do it locally, you're going to run into bureaucracy. You're going to need a business entity. You're going to need to be declaring monthly taxes, which is just I go into the government website. This is an absolute nightmare. You have to find a local partner. You have to find a local representative, and it'll take you a couple of months to just get the business entity going. Then you got to make sure your product complies. And I don't want to make it sound like this is just too hard. I just want to make sure that anyone's listening to this, there are going to be probably some additional challenges to what you would normally expect. For Europe, you can get a company to do your VAT. In Mexico, you need your own company to do it, right? That sort of things. You got to make sure your product complies, and not only that it is legal to sell, but also that it is properly labeled in the local language. And it includes like your importer on record and so on and so on. And once you have that, like, the product compliance, depending on the product, can take up to 12 months. It can be anywhere from 30 days to 12 months, depending on what you're selling, on what you're doing. And then you get into your usual logistical challenges, right? Like, who's your IOR? How are you shipping? What's your tariff percentage? Well, where did the product come from? All right, we got to make sure we're documenting all of this. Do I have my HS code? Great. Like, that just made my life a little bit easier. But there's still, there's still all these are all the challenges to just get it into the country. And now you have it in the country, and it's like, okay, first of all, I have 2 marketplaces to take care of, right? Because I'm not just going to be on Amazon. I need Amazon and Mercado Libre, and potentially things like Walmart, right? And Coppel and Liverpool, like local marketplaces. Now you're asking yourself, how do I fulfill all of these orders? That's a completely fair question. Trust me, yes. Now, Mexican by Mexican regulations, you need to provide customer service, and even within Amazon, you get an Amazon message, you get it in Spanish. All right, well, you need a customer service representative that speaks Spanish, right? And now you have great. You did all of this. You have all of your setup. Now let's reach the customer. Well, guess what? Consumer shopping behavior is a little bit different as well. Your average consumer is not going and typing a generic keyword into Amazon unless it's a very generic product. So if you have a little bit of more nuanced brand, maybe you have a more niche product, you are much better off trying to do your TikToks, do your Instagram, do your Facebooks, do your off-platform marketing to bring them into the product, right? So you need to understand the shopping behaviors, because ultimately we're on our way there. But as I mentioned earlier, we are a 666 million people slowly moving into the e-commerce market, right? But these are 666 million people you want to reach. All right. So this all sounds like a nightmare. Why would I actually do this? I mean, that has to be your next question, right? Like, why would I ever try to get into Mexico or into Latin America, if this is, when I'm importing to Brazil, I'm going to get hit with 40% taxes. You want to do it because once you find the logistical solutions and once you have all these problems down pat, what you will see is a market that's growing 30% year over year. It is a market that can be an instant 10% bump to your total sales, like without even thinking about it, right? And it is a market, like I said, where the pie is growing, and the game of acquiring a brand new consumer is much easier than acquiring a consumer that already has brand loyalty to another product, right? On top of that, just looking at the macro sort of stance of these platforms, what you'll see is essentially where Amazon was in 2016 or 2017. And anyone that's a seller on Amazon right now, Amazon US, what they'll say is, I would do anything to have started my brand in 2016 and be on Amazon, right? Because ultimately, who amongst us doesn't want to be the person that owns the listing for the 18,000 review garlic crusher, right? That everyone's seen when learning e-commerce. And that's what what the market really has the potential for new sellers, for experienced sellers from abroad to be selling their products in a place where they can get the organic ranking and grow with the market, right? That's why I'm so passionate about this market. A, because I'm here and I want access to all the brands that I see on TikTok and I can't buy yet. But B, because we are really going to be seeing this growth year over year, over year, over year. Anyone that's looking at Latin America, that's looking at Japan, that's looking at Europe as a directly, how do I get in and make money within the next 2 months? I think you're looking at it wrong. I mean, you are going to be making money within the next 2 months, but the question is, what is the game plan? What am I going to be making 8 years from now? Right. And I think that's where, I'll leave it at that. Like, you need to be in here.